Welcome everyone. I'm not only here as a practitioner, so coming more from the private sector, but I'm also very much here as somebody who likes to help more dialogue between the public and the private sector, which is a huge motivation to be among yourselves today. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A, particularly to exchange on what are good ways and what are good interfaces to bring the public and private sector together. Now, I choose to not build too much suspense here on what my key messages will be. I think what you will see throughout the talk is these four things. I think what we need to acknowledge is that being an organization which is future prepared is not coming as a default thing. It's coming as a meaningful action thing. So we need to make sure that we have organizations who are willing and capable to be future prepared. Many organizations have unlearned in the last decades to be future oriented. And I will tell you how it looks like in the private sector and maybe also some learnings then for the public sector from that. But in a sense, I think we need to remarry foresight and strategy. We need, particularly now, future-oriented and future-prepared organizations to help us to tackle the challenges which are ahead. And that comes in two levels. One is that organizations need to be able to do what I like to call meaningful strategic moves. So not just more of the earlier things they did, but something new, testing out new business models, new approaches to collaboration, etc. And I do believe that we need to work across the public and private sector domain in order to tackle the societal and planetary challenges which are in front of us. So why am I particularly interested in this? Not just as a researcher. I've been now probably looking into how firms are preparing for the future for over 20 years, but also because I'm in a particular place, and that's the EDHEC Business School, which has various campuses in France and which is among the leading business schools in France, one of the most international ones, which is also reflected by being in the top 10 of European business schools. And we like to think that we also need to question deeply how we as a business school bring value to society. So we have 5 years ago adapted a mission, which we call leveraging the power of business to serve future generations. And I think that was not only very necessary, but it's also coming at a time where it is already very, very timely. We need to make sure that decisions not only we take in our organizations, but also that future leaders, which we educate at business schools, they taking decisions which take future generations into account. So there's a couple of things which I would like us to reflect together on. The first is, why do organizations are not by default future prepared? And from the private sector, there's here my top 5 reasons. So the first reason is that when you're doing well, then you're focusing mostly on growth. And that means that you're not in what we like to call probabilistic search, where you're actually looking for new opportunities. You're in a state where you're actually quite happy to make sure that your business model scales. Unfortunately, the opposite is often also not helping. So if you're in too much of financial pressure, which many organizations across various industries today certainly are, you also cut down on future preparedness because you focus on liquidity. Another thing which we have seen coming in as crises, or some call it also cascading, multiple crises have hit the private sector. Many organizations have responded by taking less risk, by reducing their planning horizon. There's only a few companies, and that we'll see also in our study, which I show you some data from a bit later on, that only few in this moment are venturing out, actively reducing uncertainty. Too much complexity can also be a problem. If you feel we can't take any decisions in organizations, then you hope to reduce complexity in order to make sure that your organization can take decisions and move forward. And what we feel is also a particular struggle for private sector organizations is that once you've been born a certain type of company, you like to stick to that. So I'm giving here the example of if you're managing a car company, then you have a mandate to manage a car company and not necessarily a mandate to manage a mobility company or becoming part of a sustainable transport future. And given that you might not have the mandate, you will also feel you don't have the resources, and all that creates then a vicious cycle of staying close to your existing business model. So these are my top 5. I don't think it's an exhaustive list, but at least those 5 show us that we need to make a conscious effort to become future prepared. Now, why do we need to be future prepared? Well, the first thing, and that I experienced very early in my career, was working in a telecommunication company in Germany, which should not be named, but which had the challenge of liberalization. So having already 100% of the market and a market being liberalized means that if you want to keep your revenues or keep maybe even growing your revenues, you need to do something else. And then you're suddenly competing against very different rivals, some rivals which even emerged only at that time, like voice over IP providers, etc. So rules of the games change fundamentally will mean that your classical positioning frameworks for strategy making will fail you. So you need to go beyond that. The second reason is external shocks. So nothing to do with you. You're not at the root of the problem, but you need to rethink how your business works, how your industry works in response to artificial intelligence, proliferation of armed conflicts, inflation, you name it. So such external shocks, they're hitting us currently in such a short succession that many feel, okay, that means I can take no decisions, which for private sector a company already doesn't work, and I think for governments even less. We need to be able to project ourselves into a space which is distant in time and maybe also distant in how it will unfold. And I think third, and certainly not least here on that list, is where I would say we need to build a completely different level of capacity to jointly tackle collaborative responses. And as we sitting here in Paris, it's maybe interesting for people who are not from France to be reminded that every couple of years our president likes to make big visions for Europe. And recently, if you were like me, you had the chance to listen to 105 minutes of such visions if you made it to the end. And what you realize is that he's believing that the fabric of Europe is in danger, and the fabric of multilateral organizations is in danger, and democracies are in danger. And it's actually good to remind us that all this we can't take for granted. And it's much more difficult to build all these common goods than to destroy them. So it's very important that we have the right tools, the right mechanisms to tackle these collaborative challenges which lay ahead. So for all those reasons, we need organizations which are future prepared. Now, I would argue that for many decades, we have unlearned the capacity to be forward oriented as organizations. And perspective, which you might not see so often. When you think about a private sector organization, and you can think about how much that relates to governmental agencies as well. But as a for-profit organization, first, it's good if you're stubborn as an entrepreneur. You need to stick to what you want to bring to the world. Second, as you grow, you need to focus on growing your existing business model, which means it's good to actually look straight ahead, look where your business can grow, and not look in the periphery, which will reduce your future preparedness. Then, as the market in which you are matures, you need to optimize for efficiency. which means, again, you will be inward looking. You will try to optimize your processes. You might want to win on cost in your industry, etc. Let's assume you made it. Maybe it's a good moment now to think about the next step in your development. But often we rather see the complacency of the winner, or at least that's my term for it, that you're feeling actually quite well on top. And as time goes by, you might realize that now even your industry is maturing and maybe declining. So then you start fighting decline and you focus on winning on cost or other things. So it's a kind of natural behavior to not focus on looking outwards into the future and do that collaboratively at the helm of your organization. So this is kind of what we're up against. Obviously, what we would hope is that strategic foresight would come in at the right moment. Now, my point 4 is a bit the last moment that can happen effectively, but it could have happened also earlier, that you realize, how will my industry evolve? How will the rules of the game evolve? And how can maybe with my corporate activity, how can I help societal challenges? So this is really what we're trying to achieve. Now, I've been interested in this capacity to achieve this as organizations for a very long time. It goes back to almost 20 years in 2006, when I was still both a doctoral researcher and working for a large company. And ever since, we've been doing different types of benchmarking studies. We created our own maturity model. And currently we're working with the World Economic Forum on building also a self-assessment tool for the public sector using our maturity model, which was originally designed for the private sector. So for that, we want to make sure that firms can have a good feedback on their level of future preparedness. Now, in this model, there's a couple of things which I would like to highlight, and then also share some insights which we have from our recent study in 2023 and 24. So I'm introducing a bit of novel terms. If you're from the foresight space, you might think about scanning, interpretation, taking action. From a private sector, it's slightly different. Therefore, we use also slightly different terms. We're saying it's important to have this peripheral vision. So you need to perceive also where you normally are not looking. Prospecting is about this mental time travel. You need to be able to imagine your business model, your capabilities in a world which is distant in time and also distant in how the world looks like. That's what we call prospecting. And the third element, you could argue, can still be called action. But if you are in a private company, you have many stakeholders, it's very difficult to take unilateral decisions about the future of your organization. So it's important to probe into the future, to venture new businesses in order to then to engage with the stakeholders which are around you. Now, if you look underneath the hood, so to speak, how do I build this capacity to go through such 3 phases, if you want, in a reflection process? And there's a couple of things which you can build as building blocks of your capability. The first one is that you have the capacity to manage your trends. The second one is that you're able to translate what you see. And that's crucial today, where many have the feeling that we have already too much information, which means we feel informed, which feels like we are prepared. And the opposite is unfortunately true. The more information we receive, the less are we capable to defining what are courses of action, and let alone what are superior courses of action where we go beyond what our rivals are doing. So this happens in the prospection space, which can have something to do with how you invest your money. It can have something to do with working with what we like to call scenario-based strategizing. It can have something to do with how you match your existing capabilities to new challenges, new markets, etc. And all the way to the right, it's then about making sure, particularly if you're an established organization, that you can scale as fast as venture capital fueled new companies, or what we see even increasingly is private companies which scale extremely fast. So it's about also this ability to scale. Now, we take this maturity model and we do one additional thing. And that's what we show here. So we believe that if you want to have a good understanding of your future preparedness as an organization, and we like to refer to this as future fitness, also because I like this linking it to the world of sports, to your fitness as a human being, also because I like to play with the acronym of my chair, which is Foresight, Innovation and Transformation. But still, I think what you need to, as a top management team, reflect on is, what do I have as mechanisms to project myself into the future, and what is the need? And we believe that the need is driven by two main factors. The first is the outside uncertainty in your industry, in the geopolitical space, etc. And the second element is what I call here the strategic posture. Am I a company which is following others? Am I a company which we call analyzing company, one which is sort of the second fastest, or am I even a company which needs to go in first, create new markets, create new demand, etc. So when comparing the two, then we can have 4 states in future fitness. You can be vigilant, which is the preferred state. You can also do, in a sense, too much, which we call hypervigilant. That might not be a problem, but it's just a reflection of, actually, right now, the uncertainty level is maybe not so high. And therefore, you're kind of betting on the uncertainty, for example, going up, or you're in a company where you feel, well, today we are more in a defender position, but we actually need to help reinvent our industry. And then you have a future fitness level, which is already interesting for investors. It's also interesting maybe for yourself. You say, where can I improve? What we hope is also that it's interesting as a predictor for future performance. And here we're interested in 3 elements. The first is your ability to grow your business. And we find that vigilant companies, they outperform by 3 times as fast capital value growth. We see that if we compare companies inside the industry cluster, they have a higher profitability than their peers, which is significant. And what I'm mostly interested in today is their ability to pivot, to go beyond the status quo, to make what I introduced earlier as this markedly different strategic moves. And this, I think, is also important when we think about this in our ability to transform industry, to make them more sustainable. I spent some 10 years in Denmark and had a chance to follow quite closely one very interesting company, which was called Dong Energy before, which was a company known for many things. It's standing for Danish oil and gas. So it's about extracting oil, which is already an industry which you, from today's perspective, would say that's maybe a bit of a legacy business. They're also known, as many Danish companies, actually to be able to manage very complex projects. So they were also in a contract to build a coal-fired power plant in Germany, in Greifswald, which was then one which was for a time all over the news. And then eventually the company decided to close down this project because of a lot of resistance towards yet another project for non-renewable energy. What happened afterwards is that Dong Energy had a deep realization that they are standing on a legacy business platform, which has no or very limited future. But that alone doesn't help. The question is then, is there somewhere else where we can go? And at that time, they felt, well, in the energy space in which we are at home, there's one big thing emerging, and that's wind energy, and particularly offshore wind. And they take, at that time, a lot of time to consolidate their stakeholders, talk to them, and they take a very, very bold strategic moves, which is markedly different from the rest, in the sense that they say, okay, we're going to go into offshore wind, and we're going to place an order with Siemens Gamesa of 500 wind turbines for offshore wind, which was more than the entire installed capacity at that time, which is a move which in most private companies you would not even dare dream about. Here is, of course, also backing from stakeholders like the Danish state, but also this kind of feeling that eventually it has to come there. The costs need to come down and the economies of scale need to be in our favor. It's a bit like I'm a sailor, so you're sometimes in this situation where the wind is now coming with a bit of a stronger force and you're feeling my boat is starting to pivot and maybe I'm going to collapse, and you need to trust that the speed of your boat is going to pick up so that it rebalances your boat. And it's a bit like that. It's not easy at all to be able to do that. But it's a success story from there on. They also helped through lobbying to open up the huge American market for offshore wind. And as we see on this chart, they nicely outperformed and also rivals in the energy business. So this is this quest for this superior courses of action. And when you look at what we see in our studies today, then we see that we only see about these 15% of companies being either vigilant or highly vigilant. That means these other companies, they have deficiencies in order to be sufficiently future prepared. Now, just a couple of highlights from our study. When you think about the capacity to understand your environment, many have created Foresight radars so that they have a continuous flow of information. Many struggle to engage internal stakeholders, which are more and more bombarded by information. And we see more and more interest in automating things. And some companies are doing already a very good job, but overall that's more in the infancy. What I find very promising is this capacity through AI to crack this problem, which many foresighters have, is that once they created a report, well, people need to almost read it as a report. And that never works. Stakeholders need it at a different time, in a different format, more specific. And AI can really help in this. So once you publish data, AI can make it customer-centric, so to speak, or internal customer-centric, I should say, in this case. Then prospecting is, for many organizations, the weakest link in this continuum. Very few work systematically with data in it. Many organizations are still used to work with qualitative scenarios, but it's only so far that can go. What the future is really about leveraging data analysis on learning curves, on where will the economies of scale be sufficiently high that we can see this future emerging. And we need a lot more linking foresight to the strategy development and in the private sector to mergers and acquisition activities. And here, from our perspective today, we should add to link it also to policy dialogue. That would be crucial here. Maybe just here to round up these three phases, I think in probing, many organizations from the private sector, they have invested also in venturing and incubation activities. Many of those feel they didn't get a full return on investment. And that is often because they find it hard to go sufficiently far in making bold investment decisions, scaling fast enough. And that's something where there's a lot of room for improvement. And so there's also a lot of room for improvement to collaborate more internally across internal silos and with other organizations. So finally, to round up a bit this talk, if we come back to this necessity to tackle societal and planetary challenges, I think Foresight gives us a language, gives us common frames of reference. It's also surprising that many organizations, also multinational organizations I talk to, they say we struggle with creating positive outlooks. When we're here in the middle of the European Union, then many forget that we used to be at war with each other. In the region I'm coming from in Lille, it's unfortunately very apparent. If I go and take a ride with my bicycle, then I'm feeling that I'm seeing more war cemeteries than villages. It's terrible. Place at the Somme, there was wars where 20,000 people lost their lives in a day. Today it's a natural paradise. I recommend going there. But it reminds us on the necessity to have common frames of reference. In the private sector, it's often pictures like this, where we take a future outlook and then can invite different units on this future outlook. This is another example from Evonik, with whom we work today also on the future of what we call nutrition and well-being, which is a sector which is today, particularly in France, very challenged. Many people don't have access, even in France, to healthy nutrition because of price barriers. So it's also an industry which needs to reinvent itself. So what I would like to reflect also with you on, can we get to a state where across the public-private domain, we can engage again in this type of moonshot thinking? What is a relevant problem to tackle? What are new technologies, new approaches which allow us tackling this? And how can we see this evolve in the next 10 years' time? We're sitting in an organization which is full of democratic countries. And it will be very interesting to see whether we actually on the back foot right now, because if you're in a more autocratic regime, you find it easier to do 20 years, 30 years plan than you have in a democratic environment. But I'm a true believer that that's not the end of the story, but rather the beginning. And it's always fashionable to quote a good French thinker. This is one of my favorite quotes. Foresight is not only not about predicting, but it's about informing positive action. And this positive action needs to be also emotionally engaging. We can't make all these plans without the customer, without other people who need to get involved. But foresight is, I think, at the core of the techniques which we need to incite people and engage people in positive change. So thanks very much.